Let's see, we'll go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance first. Who do we have out here that I have to see? Terry Nagel, Madam former Mayor Terry Nagel, would you mind please leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance? There we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Madam City Clerk, roll call, please.
Just promoting Councilmember Ortiz. Councilmember Brownrigg.
Here.
Councilmember Stevenson.
Here.
Councilmember Ortiz.
Here. Do I need to do this right now?
Not yet. I just need
Very good. I'm here.
Vice Mayor Beach.
Here.
Mayor Coulson.
Here. We have a request for AB 2449 remote participation from Councilman Ortiz. I'll turn it over to City Attorney, please.
So the councilmember has requested, Councilmember Ortiz has requested participation pursuant to remote participation pursuant to AB 2449 because of his health condition. So Madam Mayor, unless there is any objection from the council can proceed and allow him to participate remotely.
All right. Anyone have an objection? I see none. Then we will go ahead and allow Councilman Ortiz to participate. Thank you very much. We have a report out from closed session.
There was no reportable action, Madam Mayor.
All right. And then we have upcoming events, which may have been sent to me today, but I didn't see them. So I'm just going to open it up to anyone, any of our staff or anyone on the council who might have an upcoming event that they want to talk about. Anyone? It's the new year. Margaret, anything? No? Okay. Oh, we do. We have Kevin. And I don't know if Brad has anything for library, but we'll start with Kevin.
Board of Trustees meeting.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Just a reminder, we have a workshop for the Broadway specific plan tomorrow evening at the community center from 6 to 8 o'clock. We also have a pop-up going on, hopefully weather permitting, on Broadway, corner of Broadway and Paloma tomorrow from 12 noon to 2 o'clock. We encourage people to go to one or both, one or both. This is first meeting for the Broadway specific plan, so we look forward to community input.
Where is that happening, Mr. Gardner?
It'll be at the community center. I believe it's the Maple Room and 850 Burlingame Avenue.
Thank you. The only thing I have is the reminder of Friday. We do have our Chamber of Commerce lunch at the Hyatt Hotel. If anyone is planning to go, I believe it's 11:30 to 1:30. Today was kind of the last bit for tickets, but I'm sure if anyone wants to really go and doesn't have a ticket, can contact Susan Baker at the Chamber and join us for a State of the City Assembly. Supervisor Dave Pine will be talking about giving us an update on the county. It will be his last one that he ever does for us as he retires this year. And Assemblywoman Pappen will be giving an update. And then we have Professor Dr. Merrill Ulrich, who's going to come, and Merrick Osborne, who's going to come and speak about artificial intelligence and bias that can exist in that work. So please join us if you can. If there are no other upcoming events, we have a presentation, a review of the city's pension liabilities. Turn it over to City Manager Goldman, and I'm
going to invite our Finance Director, Helen Newscott, to come on up and introduce our presenter.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening, Mayor and Council member. As you know, the city last time did the pension study back to 2017. The pension plan, the major significant role play was investment returns, really impact our annual contribution. For last few years, for example, fiscal year 2021, the investment gains 21.3%, and then 2021-22 become 6.1%. And then 22-23, 5.8%, which was below the expectation of 6.8. With all that, this fluctuation for our investment return triggered our net pension liability changes swing as well. So it's time for us to provide update to the council and then take a look at our pension unfunded liability and then come up with, different scenarios play out how we're going to funding our pension continually. With that, I will invite Doug Pryor from Foster Foster actuary firm to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Good to be here. Okay, thank you. Doug Pryor, an actuary with Foster and Foster. We are probably better known as Bartell Associates. We were acquired about a year and a half ago. But at any rate, we're an independent actuarial firm that go around the state taking kind of independent view of analysis of CalPERS pension programs across the state. You could go ahead. The first slide we have here is historical returns. It just underscores the volatility that's inherent in a pension plan. What you see here, the green lines are the annual investment returns on the trust. You see the rocky road that you've been on, especially the last couple of years. As Helen mentioned, 2021 was the 21% return roughly, followed by a negative 6.1 return in 22. It bounced back a little bit last year to about 5.8%. The numbers we show there, they're actually, not to dig too much into the weeds at this point in time, but CalPERS announces a return initially in July, but they have a lot of privately held investments. So when they go to publish their financial statement months later, there's a second return that's more accurate that's published. So there's kind of a footnote there noting that the 2023 return that they initially announced at 5.8% turned out to be a little better this time. The 6.1% is what showed up in their financial statement. If you go forward to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about what the city benefits are. So you have, two classification of employees, miscellaneous safety police. The fire police are off with the group that you're outsourcing the fire services to at this point in time. And what you have for each of these is two formulas. Tier 1, which was pre-PEPRA. PEPRA became in effect in 2013. For miscellaneous, a 2.5 at 55 formula. For safety, a 3 at 50. Each of those groups have the PEPRA state mandated formulas for those new members hired 2013 and later. The way the formula works is kind of that, I guess it would be the third square bullet there. What a individual gets when they retire from the city is years of service multiplied by the applicable percentage. And we have the percentages on the following two slides times final average earnings. And the final average earnings are either the highest 1 or 3 year average as the table notes there. And the percentage varies by when you retire from the city. It is just city service, so that counts towards what get paid from the city. So for miscellaneous, we have a number of formulas here. The blue across the x-axis is age. The blue line is your 2.5 at 55 formula. So if you look at the age 55 point across the x-axis and go up, there's the 2.5% percentage that applies. And you can see it levels out there and it's 2.5% for all years. The PEPRA formula is the red. Under PEPRA, you can't retire until age 52 for miscellaneous. You can see that formula, that percentage ramps up very quickly. What you do see is at age 67, they're actually the same percentage. Now, PEPRA has certain other limitations on the payroll that can be included. So you won't really get the same benefit for two individuals retiring under each of those at age 67. But nonetheless, it is, in terms of percentage, is a pretty close formula. Go to the next one, we have the safety. The blue is the 3 at 50 on the upper top of that slide there. The red is the PEPRA 2.7 at 57 formula. I didn't mention on the miscellaneous, what you have in the dashed lines there are all the other formulas available under CalPERS universe. So you can see kind of where your formulas sit with respect to all the formulas that are available out there under CalPERS. I had a couple more background slides before I kind of want to get to specifics of your miscellaneous and safety plan. So the next slide is really a very important concept. You get your CalPERS reports, and what they do is they assume you'll get a 6.8% long-term return on the trust. they also have this thing called a risk mitigation policy. And what the risk mitigation policy is it's a strategy or policy they developed to move to more conservatively invested portfolio over time. So that means even though we believe, CalPERS believes as they're invested today, they should get 6.8% going forward, they're going to change how they're invested going forward to become more conservative and get a lower return in the future. And the way this works is they're really waiting for years where they're very good returns. And in those years, they're going to take a little bit back in terms of the way to think about this is if you were at 20% contribution rate and you had a great investment year and your contribution would have dropped to 18%, what they're going to do is they're going to decrease the discount rate, take some risk off of the table. Instead of going from 20 to 18, you go from 20 to 19. So there'll be good news in those good years, but it won't be as good as it would have been otherwise. If you could move forward to the next slide. This is kind of a summary of how we look at the risk mitigation policy. So they're not on a set path. It's not as though their policy says, all right, next year we're going to go from 6.8 to 6.75 and the following year to 6.7. It's going to depend on what the returns are in the future. And so what we've done is surveyed some outside investment advisors, looked at volatility in terms of likely ranges of future investments. And the thick green line there is where we expect the discount rate to be in the future. So another way of thinking about this is that's really what we expect future investment returns to be. 6.8% today on the far left is invested today, but that will ramp down to about 6% over around a 20-year period. So if you keep focusing on thick green line, if you think about this, that means that we don't expect them to get 6.8% going forward. We also don't really expect them to get 6 that low. There are going to be some years above. And so just keep in mind, kind of when we look at some information later, we'll kind of give you some numbers based on something in between the 6 and 6.8 to try to get a better measure of that unfunded liability. The graphic there shooting up and down has to do with the investment volatility in the future. And all that's really saying is there's really not a set predicted path that the risk mitigation policy will put your agency and other agencies on. There's ranges of likely outcomes. So then kind of the numbers shooting up and down there are sort of like half the time where we might expect the returns to be, okay? And we'll get back to that graphic later. So we have a couple other background slides. One to mention, despite their policy of risk mitigation to move to more conservative investments, if you go back to what happened in 2021, after they had that great 21% return, that happened, risk mitigation kicked in. They would have gone to 6.8% for their discount rate. But at the same time, they were doing an analysis of how they were invested and wanted to be invested going forward. So they updated their investment policy and went from the left column to the right. And what you see there, the most interesting, I think, item there is that last row. The standard deviation, right, is a measure of the risk of the portfolio. What you see is in that risk mitigation year, despite their policy, they ended up increasing the risk, unfortunately, right? So despite that policy, in that year, they managed to do something different. Now, they review these assumptions in the portfolio roughly every 4 years. So if this had happened at another point in time, probably they would have reduced the risk. But it happened to be in a year in which they were also doing this additional analysis on how they should be invested long-term. And they didn't, it didn't really, in my words, I wouldn't say that they abided by the risk mitigation policy or strategy in making this change.
But to be fair, it's a statistical risk. It's the standard deviation, which is, not necessarily the actual risk.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to measure the risk, right? And this is one measure is a standard deviation, right? But it's, yeah, that's right. Okay. So one last background slide about the city's pension obligation bond, because we're going to be including the impact of this on your overall pension costs later on. Back in 2006, about a $34 million POB, as they're termed, was issued. About $6.2 million is left on that bond with the full payoff date in 2036. So that money was obviously taken invested in CalPERS. At that time, you had the three plans, miscellaneous, police, and fire plans. It's essentially a arbitrage, hoping to get a higher return with CalPERS than the cost of borrowing. Sorry.
Just a question to that then. So to that effect, have we earned a higher return than the cost of borrowing?
Yeah, we didn't do a detailed analysis, but if you look back to when you issued back in 06, I think the returns with CalPERS have been on average about 5 to 6%, somewhere 5.8 to 6.5, somewhere in that range, depending on how you want to, look at arithmetic or geometric. But right, I don't know what the cost of the coupon rate on the bond. I don't think it would have been that high. But I think if the question is, are you ahead of the game? We didn't do a detailed analysis, but I think you are.
Okay. Yeah. I think I analyzed it maybe a year or two ago and we were like break even, maybe behind.
Okay.
Because we invested in 2006 and the market crashed in 2008.
Right. But yeah, there've been some good years since then.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah.
So maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe we've made up.
So yeah, I had looked at, June 30, 07 through June 30, 23. And again, depending on whether arithmetic or geometric, I think it was like 5.8 to 6.6%.
But the important thing is when we're looking at these 86.7 million in pension liability, that does not include the 6.185 million in POB as well.
Yeah, the first number, the 8, what was the first number you mentioned?
The 86.7 million pension liability for the miscellaneous, which takes us to.
Oh, further down on the slides?
Mm-hmm.
Right, that does not, well, is that the liability or the assets you're referring to? Must be the I'm sorry, 86, where's the 86?
So at the very front of the presentation, I'm sorry. Yeah, 86.7 million pension liability is what was on one of the pages that was written up there. I'll have to look. But at any rate,
A full study. She might be looking at the full study.
Oh, okay.
yeah. But at any rate, all I'm saying is the number that we have that we owe, it doesn't include, there's in addition to it, we still owe the 6.185 million.
Right.
So there's the two numbers combined.
Right. And so when we do our projection of contributions, we're taking the sum of what we expect you have to contribute to CalPERS plus the payments on the POB.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was kind of some general background, and we certainly want to cover the pension obligation bond. And now we can move forward. We want to kind of information on the miscellaneous program. I'll skip through some of these pretty quickly. 187 actives as of June 30, 2022. You have another 310 former employees collecting a pension. You can see the bottom row, that average pension is about $33,800. That's, not indicative of a career employee at the city of Burlingame, right? Because there's movement throughout, cities. So that would only be the city's portion of the pension of the $33,800. If you move forward, then we get to kind of the first on the funded status. So we have 3 years here, 21, 22, and then what we projected June 30 of 23. The green bars are the assets. The multicolored bar or gray bars are the accrued liability. You can see the boxes popping up there on what the unfunded liability is. So $33 million, June 30, 21. In the most recent CalPERS actuarial evaluation report for the miscellaneous plan, a $53 million unfunded liability that jumped up primarily because of that negative 6.1 to 7.5% return, whichever you want to call that. And then they did slightly miss their target, again, projected to June 30, 23. So we have another increase, a small one, but from about 53 million to 54 million as of June 30 of 2023. All of these numbers are based on what CalPERS uses for the 6.8% discount rate or long-term return on the trust. If you go to the next slide, what we have there is then there's that $53 million, $53,200,000 in unfunded liability to the left-hand side. And as you recall that risk mitigation slide, what we're saying is you're not going to get 6.8% going out in the future. It won't be as low as 6. If you kind of average those out, you might be somewhere around 6.3. CalPERS publishes the 6.8 and the 5.8, those bookends there. And we just use those two to interpolate. And the point here is, if you really asked our opinion about the unfunded liability on the plan, is it 53 million now? It's probably closer to 65 million when you take into account what the returns will going forward. So we have a few slides then on funded ratio. So funded ratio is assets divided by accrued liability. You look at this trend here, and it's pretty similar throughout the state. You can see in the early 2000s, over 100% funded. That kind of ramped down with the .com bust there. At some point in the later years, the 2.5 at 55 formula was implemented. That applied to all past service, so that bumped the liability back up. You can see, and we kind of, as we get out of the last 10 plus years, it's kind of oscillated a bit, but kind of in the 70 to 80% range for the most part, right? That's,
If I may,
Yes,
Mr. Mayor.
please.
I mean, one of the frustrating for those sitting up here is for the last 10 years, or certainly the last 8, we have put in more than we were told was the ordinary contribution in order to try to catch up. And it feels like we're running faster and faster and just standing in place. It's kind of frustrating.
Right. So one thing I should have pointed out is we'll get to at the end, you have the supplemental trust with like $20 million in it. So this does not include those funds. But you may have also put in extra money CalPERS, and I understand you wish you would hope to see more improvement here. The next slide kind of shows.
Actually, just maybe to make it clear, we did not overfund. We put our excess overage into the 115 account. And the reason we didn't overfund was because we felt we could get a better return on our money than most likely CalPERS was going to get.
In the 150.
That's a really important reminder for myself, though. So that money is not captured in this presentation.
It's not captured.
Yeah, not
Into PERS yet.
right. Well, we have slides at the end to show how you can use that money. And they're really, the two reasons to do it, one for the return, the other is for kind of budgeting. And we kind of have slides at the end to show how you can use it to help you sort of deal with the expected increases coming.
Sorry. And
Yes, please. No, it's fine.
so I looked at all,
Sorry, Councilmember Brownrigg, can you move that microphone?
Yeah.
So that people at home.
so I looked at all 60 something slides beforehand, but I can't quite recall. Is there a slide that actually adds the 115 money to our current contributions and then gets an actual sense of where we are versus our responsibilities? Is there a slide like that in your deck?
I don't think we've done that. As I said, 20 million. We do have some slides coming up at the end after the safety where we show the combined funded status of the two plans. And again, there's additional $20 million. So we could kind of talk about it at that slide, but I don't think we specifically showed it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead. Anyone else? Real quick. Sorry. The other interesting thing on this slide on page 13 are the pension contribution holidays that were taken in 01, 02, 03, and 04. So in other words, when returns were good, many cities opted to take pension contribution holidays, which is very poor business practice. You should always contribute and dollar cost average into the markets over time. And I don't think, given the line that we're looking here, the ascension of that line, I don't think we're ever going to see that opportunity again. But I just pointed out in the event that, in those years, 01, 02, 03, 04, that money was going into probably infrastructure and other things. It didn't, the value of compounding money, had we put money in those years or, money had gone in those years, it would be compounding today and we would have a lower funded status. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So if I could comment on that, the other thing, we really have two lines here. The fluorescent green is the normal cost, right? And as a percentage of payroll, and then the darker green with the square markers is the overall city contribution. And so actually PEPRA has changed things. So, if PEPRA won't allow the contribution at this point to go below the normal cost. So you wouldn't, under the current law,
Yep.
have those contribution holidays at this point in time. So if we could move forward to then, let me talk a little bit about assumptions because we get to the projection. So we've done this stochastic model where we've surveyed 8 independent outside investment advisors on what they expect returns for. Is actually a survey done a year and a half ago, approximately. But that gets us to what we expect returns to be in the future as we project everything out here. We've taken into account the initially announced 5.8% return in 2023. One of the things the investment advisors have said is they expect returns to be subpar over the next 10 years and then improve after that. Now, you know, there's that is what they believe. I think they've believed that for the last 5 or 10 years when we surveyed them, that, 10 years from now, things will get better. You know, I'm not an investment guy, an actuary.
We're so good about predicting the future 10 years from.
Yeah, right. So, and you have to wonder if there's always going to be a bounce back 10 years from now. Is it really happening? Right. So nonetheless, that's what CalPERS has concluded to. So that's what we use, but probably what's more important here is that we're taking into account subpar returns over the next 10 years. So you'll see that has a effect of sort of escalating contributions in the future. And we're also taking into account the risk mitigation policy to get is going to result in lower returns. You can move forward to the next. So really, I think all I want to point out on this slide is we're assuming all future hires are PEPRA. May or may not be exactly true, but you may have some classic going forward, but most will be PEPRA. The projections include the POB proceeds, but not the 115 trust money. And then finally, we're including, you have a 1.5% cost sharing with the miscellaneous classic employees. So that's also built in to offset the projections that we're going to look at here, starting on the next slide. So this is a short-term, relatively short-term 10-year projection. The graphic here is similar to the risk mitigation slide, where what we have here is based on investment volatility. The thick green is where we expect contribution rates to be as a percentage of payroll. And then what you have shooting up and down is sort of likely ranges. So if you look at the last data point there, fiscal year 35, what you see is about a 28% of payroll. I'm sorry, 38% of payroll contribution. And what we're saying is, due to investment volatility, while that's the expectation, half the time you're going to be somewhere between 21 and 49%. So I know, initial reaction before I started thinking about how this works years ago is I thought, oh, it'd be nice to get a really tight range there and say, okay, we expect 38, but you'll be somewhere between 36 and 40. That would be great information to give to an agency. But the problem is that kind of the inherent volatility in a pension investments is going to result in this kind of wide ranges. So that's just par for the course with how the money is invested. And you can see that the path that you're on. If you go to the next slide, what we have is a further out projection. What this illustrates is over the long term, the expectation is, despite all these things, the poorer returns for the next 10 years, the risk mitigation kicking in, we still expect those contribution rates to come down, right? Now, of course, a million things are going to change over the next 20, 30 years. But I think 15 years ago, we couldn't stood in front of you and said, CalPERS has a policy in place to have you pay down your unfunded liability. Today we can. Hopefully the assumptions will hold, and this will all play out as planned, if you will. But this is kind of what we come up with on the contributions. Again, with the upper and lower, you can kind of see there's a decent chance you would be above or below the upper or lower data points here. So you can see the upper range is really probably would be pretty painful, right? And the investment people are saying it's a 25% likelihood you'd be kind of on that upper path or above, unfortunately. So the next 2 slides are really then without the investment volatility, just looking through what the components are of the expected contributions. So, you really have 4 components here. You have the orange is the normal cost rate. The red is the unfunded liability payment. The purple there is the POB payment. And so if you stack all those up and then offset by the blue, which is the classic employee 1.5% of payroll contribution, you get to the total at the top there is a percent of payroll, just so you can see the components. And then the following slide shows a similar thing. With all this up to this point, it's been percentage of payroll. What you see here is dollar amounts in thousands. So you can see for this year, we're estimating about $7.3 million in total city contributions, increasing to 7.8 million next year and projecting to be a little under 10 million by the end of the period. Okay. Okay. So that's the miscellaneous plan. Yeah, you could jump forward. So I'm kind of jump through these hopefully a little quicker because this is now similar information all for safety. 36 safety employees. This is the police, 93 former police officers that are receiving a payment. I should say some of the information here is different than miscellaneous because miscellaneous, you have over 100 employees, is what's known as a standalone plan. So you have your evaluation, one report for your miscellaneous folks. For safety, you have the police, it's in a risk pool. So you have two separate reports from CalPERS, one for the 3 at 50 people, tier 1, and one for PEPRA. So this is all combining that information. We're also a little less information here historically and whatnot. So for example, we don't have average benefit here compared to as we did for miscellaneous. But if we move forward, look at the funded status. Despite the fact that you have, a fraction of the number of employees, the unfunded liability is not that different. If you look at projected to 2023, what we have here is about a $40 million unfunded liability projection. I think the miscellaneous was about 53 million. So this is a little lower, but a lot less employees in this group. If you move forward to the next slide, again, the concept of risk mitigation, the $39 million June 30, 22 unfunded liabilities, probably closer to $47 million. Again, none of these numbers include the supplemental trust that you have. So if you move forward to 23.
One other question
yeah.
on the safety is just the police. I want to make sure
That's
that
right.
we're clear about that. Doesn't include our additional obligations for fire.
Well, you don't directly with CalPERS have additional obligations for the fire that
Right.
I'm aware of.
But
Right?
our
It's
budget
through-
does have additional contributions
yeah,
that go to
through the South.
JPA.
What's the name?
County Fire.
Central,
Central-
not South, Central County Fire.
Right.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that when we were talking safety, we are only talking our police department. We have a separate obligation for fire.
That's right. So, and not to belabor this point, but through Central County Fire, they charge, I don't know how they're charging, if they directly charge the CalPERS cost or whether it's sort of like one big bucket, but they technically they may have the obligation, but you get passed on the cost to a certain extent, right? Okay.
Well, and I believe also if for some reason the JPA liquidated, the liabilities would return back to the city. I believe that's how the agreement would work.
Okay. Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know the details.
Yeah.
So yeah, historical funded status, again, because you're in a risk pool, a lot less information, but similar sort of more recent history, similar sort of history here on the funded status. And if you move forward to the next slide, historical contributions also ramping up over time. Again, we don't have the 2000, 2001 to those early contributions that were essentially zero. That probably were zero for police too, but we just don't have that historical information. If you move forward then to assumptions here for the projections, same as for miscellaneous. The one difference here is that the employee cost sharing here for your safety polices, classic members pay 4% of payroll towards the city rate. So that's built into the projections. As you go to the next slide, that's going to have the first 10 years, a little more of an increase here on the safety from the 60+%, that's 69%, ramping up to about 97% of payroll over a 10+ year period. And then again, you have the kind of likely ranges there due to investment volatility. And then if you do the following slide, similar to miscellaneous, what we're saying is, yeah, we expect that, over time, that ramp up is going to pay the unfunded liability down. And over the long term, very long term, you should end up back at the normal cost rate. If you move forward to the next slide, then we have this breakout of kind of the components without the investment volatility. Again, you have orange is normal cost rate, red is the unfunded liability payment. You then have purple and blue being the POB payments for purple, and then the blue, the employee contributions. As I said, a little higher for this plan. That gets you to the total expected contributions over time. So that's the last on the safety police. If you move forward, we then have the one slide of combined, I'm sorry, this is then dollar amounts. I skipped over. This is the same as the previous slide, but dollar amounts. So in what those amount come to in dollars, these are in thousands. And then the following slide is the where we do show the totals on the contribution projections. So you can see between miscellaneous and police, about $11 million this year, ramping up to a little under $17 million in the last year projected. And then if you look at the following slide, funded status. So this is, again, without the 115 trust, but we do have on a combined basis for kind of two points in time. The June 30, 22 is as reported by CalPERS. The June 30, 23 is what we're projecting based on what they actually earned June 30, 23. So between the two, what you see is bottom right-hand quarter, $94 million in unfunded liability. And as we said, you have about $20 million in the 115 trust. So that 94 million, if you take the supplemental trust into account, is probably somewhere around about $74 million. Okay. So let's move forward to what we had done with the supplemental trust. So you have it set up. We have a general slide here. These are, you have one set up. They're fairly common. With this slide, we said 100 trusts established. I think they're well over 200 that have been established at this point in time. One of the reasons we don't include the assets in the previous information is, well, for a couple of reasons. One, because, we're looking at just what we think the bill is going to be from CalPERS on those. The other is, technically, this 115 trust doesn't count as a pension asset for accounting purposes. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, too, we like to keep it separate. But the idea, again, is it's an irrevocable trust. As you probably know, the money can only be used to either send to CalPERS or reimburse the city for CalPERS contributions. So if you go to the next slide, so there's the 20 million balance projected June 30. I suppose that should be actual June 30, 23, about $20.8 million. You've got a 5-year annualized return on this of about 5%. We've assumed that sort of return going forward in our projections, and we show you how you can use this money to budget contributions. We have assumed that there's about a $1.2 million contribution goes in for this year, which is the budget amount, which gets you to about a $23 million projected balance June 30, 24. And our understanding is you've sort of kept track of the contributions coming in, whether they're from miscellaneous or safety. So although it's one trust, the money gets split out between the two based on the money that has gone in to the trust. So if you go to the next slide, we have detail here on kind of how we're splitting this up. I think, and present value savings, you want to come back to that. But I think to illustrate, the way we look at the trust, how it's used, and the benefit, let's skip over this table and get to the next slide. So this is showing, the green line is where we expect the contributions to be for the miscellaneous plan. That's the green line. What the orange then is, if you started using the money from the 115 trust to transfer over to CalPERS, to level out, say, okay, how low can we cut our highest contribution off by? And what this is showing is if you started taking money out of the trust in 26. And basically in that year, what you see is CalPERS, we expect to ask for 36.5% of payroll in contributions. What you would do in that year is pay CalPERS 30.8%. CalPERS is going to want their money, of course, right? So their 5.7% of payroll would come from the 115 trust and be transferred over. CalPERS gets the money on the green line, but the city cost is lowered over to the orange line. Okay, so that's typically how, you know, we've illustrated the use of a 115 trust and how it's helpful for future budgeting. You know, honestly, what this doesn't do a great job of doing is it's showing really kind of where things are expected basis. What it doesn't show is what happens if you recall those contribution projections, what happens if you're on the upper range? You have a couple bad years and your contribution starts to ramp up. That's really, that's another area where this would come in really handy, right? It's sort of a rainy day fund. This doesn't do a great job of illustrating that. It's a percentage of pay. This is the miscellaneous plan. The following slide, then you look at this as dollar amounts. You have the dollar amounts listed here in thousands of dollars. So you see you're not really leveling it out. You're not leveling out your overall contribution, right? You still have some increases, but you're not going to have to go as high as you would have had to go without the 115 trust. So that's how we see typically and illustrate the 150 trust being used for the safe. This is miscellaneous. If you go to the next slide, we then have a similar chart for safety. Safety is saying, you know, look, we expect you to, you know, cap out at somewhere around 99% of payroll. And if you use the money you have in the 115 trust plus the contribution this year, you can avoid getting that high. Instead, level things out, still a high level, I understand, but level it out at 77% of payroll roughly. Okay. And then the final slide here has same information for safety. These are in dollar amounts. Again, it doesn't, we could do this model different ways. We've done the model to level the contributions out as a percentage of payroll. And so that means that the dollar amounts on both of these are ramping up. You know, you could look at this different ways. You could try to level it out as dollar amounts, but, you know, the fact of the matter is that, you know, a dollar payment 10 years from now is not as valuable as a dollar payment today. So it's kind of why we typically would look at this as a percentage of payroll and leveling it out that way. I think the way most agencies will look at this is this level percent of payroll. Okay, so I ran through that quickly, but try to cover the key points there. And I don't know if there's more questions.
We have questions, anyone? I want to check with Councilman Ortiz to start.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm fine.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Peter, Vice Mayor, Councilman Brownway? Good.
Helpful.
Okay, so no questions. Is there comments or?
I think we just wanted to bring this information to you. There's been a lot of interest on the part of the council. We are going to have a little bit of pension information at our goal setting session on January 27th. But this is all part of, you know, the financial picture of the city and how we're doing. And, you know, you see excess dollars in our budget. They're not really excess dollars because a lot of liabilities on the pension front, on CIP front, our trees need a lot of TLC. So there's just, we wanted to, you know, start to give you the picture of everything that we're facing.
Right. And I think it's really important that people understand the obligations are obligations of the taxpayers. So they're like a primary obligation. They're something we would really have to make sure we can pay these. And if we have to, if you can't, you have to cut everything else. You have to cut staffing, you have to cut CIP, these are your number one obligation, and you can see those numbers just ramping up enormously. And I really am proud of this council for taking the step to set up the 115 trust. I think it was very prudent to do when we had extra reserves and to put as much money as we can in there, because it is very important for us to be able to pay these pension obligations to the retirees of the people who worked hard for the city. And I want to make sure we don't cannibalize our budget in the future and we don't hamstring, you know, other future councils with, you know, very difficult financial decisions that would have to be made in the event of not predetermining and pre-setting money aside for these. That's it, I think. Yes,
And
please.
one question.
Yeah.
Less about the presentation, although I appreciate it. Is it a given that we start withdrawing from the 115 fund, or will this body have a policy discussion about whether we should continue
Good idea.
to pay into the 115 given these significant deficits in the future?
It's your choice when we want to do it, I believe, right? Let's talk about-
So I think this kind of some direction we want to get from council, how based on this study, you can say if we're starting drawing the money, but however, the market, how they play, we don't know, nobody able to predict. For example, we can have a liability, like 80 increase from 47 in my staff report, 47 million to 86 million in one study. So those kind of things we have to deal with this. If we're able to push to draw down the better off for the city, but that's the direction.
So is that a question that we might discuss at the?
I think it's a very good one, right? Like, can we, continue to save and continue to invest, more without having to pay? Like, it's not mandatory that we have to pay out of the 115. But for an example, during COVID, when our budget was slashed 40%, we could have paid our pension obligation out of it had we wanted, had we needed to, in order to say not lay people off.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, we didn't have to do that. We had enough reserves saved up that were not just, they can't be pulled out to just, we can't pull the reserves in the 115 trust out just to do CIP or anything, but we could offset money, right? So I think it's a really good, important conversation.
I have another question, Ms. Mayor. Is there any restriction on the level as a percentage of total obligation against the contributions that we could increase the 115 trust? In other words, are we under some sort of legal restriction by the state or any other, fiduciary?
Nothing.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Pryor, I just had one other quick question. So one thing we didn't talk about today was like the amortization of the unfunded liability. As I understand it, they used to be closer, it was more like 30 years and the states compressed it to 20. So it's like paying your mortgage off in 20 years instead of 30. And that, especially for school districts, caused a lot of pain.
Yeah.
So where are we on that amortization schedule?
Yeah, so you no longer have what's called negative amortization.
Yep.
Right? That you're not even paying interest on that unfunded liability. CalPERS has changed how they're amortizing things over the years. So you're probably still looking at a payment that might be over a 20-year period to pay off that unfunded liability. I think that's consistent with you look at that a projection of when we expect to come down to normal cost and pay off the unfunded liability. I mentioned quickly 15 years ago, CalPERS did have different methods and we're using the 30-year. And that's why I'm saying 15 years ago, we couldn't come before you and say, we think you're on a path to pay off the unfunded liability. It just wasn't sufficient. Today, the proper procedures, I think, are in place to have you pay that off.
Great.
And bottom line, about 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah.
If you're sitting in this chair in 20 years, you might have your pensions. Lucky you. Okay, Madam Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Just appreciate staff and the mayor bringing this presentation to us right off the bat in the beginning of the year. Very, very powerful. I don't have the slide in front of me right now, but it looks like we will, at least according to this chart, we may start drawing around 25, 26. Is that correct? But that's a policy decision. We could reevaluate. I just want to make sure I fully understand that.
Mhm.
And I just echo what the mayor was saying. It's compelling when you look at the 20 million that we've socked away for the pension trust fund, how that changes the percentage of payroll that we will be paying out is just so powerful. So good thing we did that.
Gives
Thank
us
you.
a lot of flexibility, I think, gives the staff a lot of flexibility and finance a lot of flexibility to, who would have ever thought we would have had COVID when we were putting 115 count together, so totally different situation. This is great. Thank you very much, Mr. Pryor. I certainly appreciate you and the hard work your firm's done. It's excellent. It's an excellent review. This is one of those meetings when I wish there was just more people sitting in the audience to hear these important words. And, and it's unfortunate there's not, but hopefully people will watch it on the video and they'll take a look and they'll see and they'll know that we're working very hard to make this, keep this city running on in a financially solvent manner. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we will have part 2 for the unfunded liability OPEB in March.
Okay, the OPEB, yay, very exciting.
Helen is just full of good news.
Helen, we are an unusual council in that I'm going to appreciate how much my colleagues are willing to geek out on pensions, which a lot of people don't want to do, but you guys have been
We
great.
geek out on a lot of stuff. Right.
Great. All right. We are moving on to public comment, or do I need to take public comments on that, or is that just a?
You should actually.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to see if anyone in the audience has a comment on the presentation that we just saw, or any member of the public. Megan? Nothing? Came in? Okay, and no one from the audience? If you want to make up. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is on the presentation we just saw. All right, so we have no public comment on the presentation, and we will move to public comments, non-agenda. And I do have 2 yellow cards, and I will call people up. I'm going to go ahead and call Jackson Peterson, I think, up first.
Good evening, esteemed members of the Burlingame City Council, distinguished guests, and fellow citizens. I'm Jackson Peterson, a Government Relations Associate with GovGPT. It's an honor to be here today to introduce you to GovGPT, an AI startup based in Mountain View, California. GovGPT is dedicated to revolutionizing city governance through the power of generative artificial intelligence. Our mission is centered around enhancing democratic processes, making them more efficient and attuned to the voices of the community. We offer a range of innovative solutions designed to optimize various aspects of city administration and citizen engagement. Our products, for instance, include advanced tools for analyzing public sentiment, facilitating more informed decision-making, and enhancing communication between city officials and residents. These solutions are crafted to adapt to the unique needs of each city, ensuring that every citizen's voice is not only just heard, but also valued. And ensuring that our technology is about bridging the gap between local government and the community, fostering a more connected and responsive governance. I look forward to discussing how GovGPT can specifically benefit Burlingame. In more detail following this meeting, I will be reaching out to schedule individual demos and answer any questions you might have. Thank you for the opportunity to present GovGPT. Together, we can embark on a journey towards smarter and more inclusive governance. I'm excited about the potential collaboration and the positive changes we can bring to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker card is from Norm Topello.
Good evening. My name is Norm Torello, and I'm speaking to you tonight about MELP, M-E-L-P, which stands for Medical Equipment Loan Program. I spoke to you last month and just wanted to follow up now to talk about this briefly again. MELP is an all-volunteer nonprofit organization that receives used or no longer needed durable medical equipment from the community, and then after inspecting, repairing, and cleaning it, loans it out at no cost to anyone who needs it. Loaned equipment includes wheelchairs, transport chairs, rollators, walkers, knee scooters, shower chairs and benches, tub transfer benches, crutches, and canes. Again, we loan this out to anyone who needs it for free. Client keeps the loaned items as long as they need them. When it's returned to us, we again inspect, clean, and repair them and make them available to others for free, and the cycle continues. For this to be successful, we have to receive equipment from the community. And that is why I'm coming one more time to talk about the fact that we're having an equipment donation drive this coming Saturday, January 20, from 9 to 4, rain or shine, at 1625 El Camino Real in Belmont. This is actually in support of a Eagle Scout candidate and his scout troop, and they're doing this as their community service project. And we are trying to help them and get, obviously, DME equipment. We have 3 goals of our program: to reduce medical equipment inequity, to improve the quality of life for our clients by reducing economic stressors on them and giving them a better daily living situation, and by reusing existing equipment and thereby keeping it out of landfills. Any equipment that can't be reloaned is disassembled and put into recycling. So I just wanted to again emphasize the fact that this is a free program available to all, no questions asked. They just need to come to our facility. And let me give you our website. Our facility is at 1063 East San Carlos Avenue, and we're open on Saturdays from 10 to 11:30. Our website is www.freemedequip.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torello. And I believe our local Rotary and Burlingame Women's Club are working to collect equipment. So if you don't want to go down there, you can contact one of them.
I definitely will. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments that are of a non-agenda nature?
We have no emails and no one else in the audience.
All right, we're going to go ahead and close public comment, and we're going to move to the approval of the consent calendar. But I am just really quickly going to say, it looks like we will have to continue item 10B. So if you are here happening to be waiting for item 10B, which is the introduction of an ordinance regarding parking limitations, I think you can safely return next month or next meeting, and we will have this agenda item there. I just don't want anyone to sit here until we get to that item and then be very unhappy that they've waited. So just, or on the television as well. All right, so we have the consent calendar. Does anyone have any items they want to remove from the consent calendar?
Madam Mayor, from the public, I have a lot of comments on 9H, so we should remove that item.
All right, we will remove item 9H,
9.
softball batting cage. Okay. All right, would someone like to make a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move to approve item 9A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I, J, K, L, M, N.
All right, we have a
Second.
motion by the vice mayor and a second by Councilman Stevenson. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brownrick,
Aye.
Councilmember Stevenson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beach,
Yes.
Mayor Coulson.
Yes. All right, item passes, and we will move back to hear some of the public comment on item H. Item, what is that? 9H.
The first email I got was from Megan Dunn. She says, "My name is Megan Dunn, and I am the current president for the Burlingame Girls Softball. I'm emailing in support of the proposed BGS batting cage project at Washington Park. I have been a part of the board for 5 years and a coach with BGS for 7 years. This project has been a goal and dream for the organization as long as I have been a part of it. Our previous president and current commissioner, Jay Leslie, has worked diligently with architects and the city to design and amend the construction of the batting cages to reach both an aesthetically pleasing and financially agreeable design. The enclosed and lit cage space at Washington will allow our players and coaches to safely practice after sunset or raining. We have been lucky to use the space at Bayside. However, we deal with lighting and weather issues during large portions of our spring and fall seasons. BGS has been lucky to maintain a large program in comparison to other city softball organizations along the peninsula. By having increased opportunity to play various seasons and with teams running at different skill levels, we have been able to retain many players from leaving for private for-profit club softball programs. This has allowed players in their increased affordable opportunities and has created a wonderful community for our players and families. Having a year-round facility would be another advantage for retaining players in our league. In addition, BGS has been and continues to be a great foundation for these players as they progress and strive to play at BHS. Like the BYBA batting cage that is accessed by the BHS baseball program, the BGS batting cage could also support our BHS softball program as they deal with the same weather and lighting issues during their season. Please reach out if you need additional information. The next email we got was from Alex. He says, I'm writing to voice my support for the Burlingame Girls Softball Batting Cage project at Washington Park. I'm asking the council to approve funding for the project. The cage will benefit 250 to 300 girls in the BGS program, allowing them to practice during rain and at night. BGS doesn't currently have this ability with the uncovered bayside cage access, has to rent portable lighting to use the space past sunset. The boys who play baseball with BYBA have access to the BHS covered batting cage, and it would be great to provide the same opportunity to BGS players. The proposed batting cages also benefit BHS girls softball in the same way BHS baseball utilizes BYBA space. We have an email from, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Khan. I hope this message finds you well. I'm writing to you as a member of the Burlingame community and a BGS board member. Today, I wish to bring your attention to the construction project of BGS batting cage at Washington Park that I believe would significantly benefit our softball teams and enhance our community's recreational facilities. BYBA has had Washington cage access that allows them to practice during inclement weather and in evenings as it is covered and lit. BGS doesn't currently have this ability. Additionally, we have to rent lighting 2 times a year in order to use this space past sunset. This facility will not only serve the needs of 250 to 300 softball players annually, but it would also benefit the girls softball team. Our next email is from Mary. She says that she is also a board member writing in support of the batting cage at Washington Park that will be discussed tonight. We'd love to give our girls the same opportunity as the boys to practice year-round in a covered and lighted batting cage. This would benefit both the BGS and the BHS girls. Our next email is from Shannon. She says, I'm writing to express my enthusiastic support for the batting cage. City-funded initiative aimed at providing a batting cage for the softball community. She's a board member and serves as the sponsorship and league development manager and has the privilege of witnessing the positive impact that such projects can have on our community. She discusses how this will align to the current Washington Park or Washington baseball cage access that allows the baseball teams to practice during inclement weather and in the evening. The Burlingame girls currently do not have this. It will benefit 250 to 300 players per year, and the cage would benefit the softball team as well. In addition to the evident benefits, the softball batting cage aligns seamlessly with our city's vision for improving the lives of youth in our community, and the project not only addresses current needs, but also continues the long-term sustainability and growth of our community. Her daughter has played at the girls softball for 9 years, and she hopes to go on and play softball at BHS. She hopes there will be a batting cage that supports girls' athletic programs and all the young girls community. Moreover, she commends the collaborative efforts that have gone into planning and developing this project. The partnership between the city and the Burlingame girls softball showcases the spirit of teamwork and commitment to making the city a better place for all residents. As a stakeholder in the community, she is confident that the softball batting cage will not only meet but exceed expectations. It has the potential to become a shining example of how strategic investments in community projects can yield lasting positive effects. I think we have 2 more. Allison states that on behalf of the softball players, parents, coaches, and fellow board members, she urges you to fund a new batting cage. She has 3 children that play in BYBA for many years, 2 of whom are now in softball after 5 years in BYBA, and has seen how much better their batting facilities are than BGS's one facility. Not only do they have 2 batting cages, but one has lights, and a roof that can be used in all weather conditions. Yes, that facility is also used by the BHS team, but a new softball batting cage would also be used by the BHS softball team. The current batting cage is doable, but it's not really fair to the 250 to 300 girls that are playing year round. Unlike the BYBA cage, the softball batting cage can only be used during dry weather, and because there are no lights, it can only be used during daylight hours. She hopes the city will support a new batting cage for the girls to give them a level playing field with BYBA. And our last email comes from Scott. He says, I would like to extend my support for the BGS batting cage. I've been a BYBA and BGS coach for the last 5 years. I've seen my son benefit from being able to use batting cages year round and in inclement weather. I wish I could say the same for my daughter. Building a covered batting cage would allow Burlingame to develop our daughters to their full potential, and we would be able to compete with other local municipalities. The city, BGS, and Jay Leslie have all been working on this project for years, and it would be great to see it make progress. The additional benefit to BHS softball allows our girls to continue to grow and develop through high school. So please consider moving forward with this project as it would benefit our kids and our community. A lot of support.
Great. Yay. Does anyone in the public have a comment? Come on out. Come on up.
Hi, my name is Jay Leslie. I'm current member of the BGS board. Madam Mayor, distinguished council members, thank you for taking this under consideration. I simply want to do two things. One, reiterate the emails that were just read, the value to the community, and what it will mean moving forward to be on equal footing for girls and boys in our community. Both programs, BYBA and BGS, have been highly successful because of the efforts of, I know, a lot of you over the years and other members of our community, and I want nothing more as a 20-year Burlingame resident to see that continue. And then finally, I'd like to thank not only the council members for your support of BGS over the years, but also Parks and Rec, Margaret and Rich, and other members of Parks and Rec that have worked so closely with us as a board over the years to see this project get to this point tonight. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Council. Peter?
Thank you, Mayor Coulson. I just want to echo my support for this as well, in line with many of the comments from the residents and Mr. Leslie today. The reality is our commitment to our community is in many different avenues to foster a positive experience, particularly for our kids who are growing up here. We help facilitate soccer by paying for fields. We help facilitate BYBA by supporting their fields and equipment. So this is not unusual for this particular request to be supported by the city. And so you know where I stand.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Appreciate Mr. Leslie and the board for their advocacy, for writing in. We could have only done it faster. Thank you so much.
Councilman Brownring?
Feels like one of you ought to make a motion.
I just want to say one thing, having served for 4 years as president of Burlingame Girls Softball. And I looked up on my calendar today to find out the very first time we started talking about the batting cage, and it was 2002. And we sit here 22 years later, finally getting a batting cage. I am very happy it is finally happening. It's a gender equity issue. It's a fairness issue, and it's an issue that I know this council believes in, that girls and boys and every gender in between has access to equal facilities and facilities that work. And most people don't even understand that a softball cage is different than a batting cage. And so, and it is, there's different equipment, there's different dimensions. The pitch plate is at a different area, the speed of the ball, the turn, the size of the ball. There's so many different things. So I just want to thank Megan and the current BGS board for their patience and for their fortitude to continue to push this. I only wish I could have gotten it done for you 20 years ago, but I'm happy to be sitting in the role of the mayor when it finally got done. It is my honor and my great pleasure to hopefully cut a ribbon on this year with this council who I know fully supports this work. I'll go ahead and make the motion. I feel like I've earned it.
I'll second it.
Thank you. And Ricardo, you're right up there too. A roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brownrigg, Councilmember Stevenson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beach,
Yes.
Mayor Coulson.
Yes. All right. Congratulations. Thank you, Margaret, and congratulations, BGS. I look forward to coming to some playing games this year. So let us know. I'll even volunteer to do sliding with the mayor or drag bunning. Let me know. Happy to be there. All right. Moving on to the rest of our agenda. We have a public hearing, item 10A, an introduction of an ordinance to repeal and replace 9.04 animals of Title IX of the Burlingame Municipal Code to clarify existing definitions, enact additional requirements for animal control, and revise the fees for animal control services. CEQA determination exempt pursuant to CEQA guidelines. Staff report.
That would be me. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is really a housekeeping item, so it's very vanilla, so I will go quickly because we have a meaty item coming up next. So the city contracts along with all the other other cities in the county with the county to facilitate and coordinate animal control services. It's delightful that we don't have to do it on our own. Animal control is a heavy lift, and the county contracts with Peninsula Humane Society and SPCA for the animal control field and sheltering services. And so some of that happens in San Mateo, some of that happens here in Burlingame. Back in 2021, the council approved an animal control agreement between the county and the cities for continued services. And the agreement that you all voted on requires that the cities each adopt and maintain animal control ordinances that are substantially the same as the county ordinance, so that everybody is working from the same page. So in late 2021, the county decided it was time to update their ordinance, which hadn't been done in like 15 years or so. I believe they said it was 2006 the last time they did it. So they worked with some city attorneys to update the regulations. They identified opportunities to clarify existing language, remove repetitive language, add substantive changes, the existing ordinance. It's all about increasing efficiency and enforcement, clarifying language that's confusing, and addressing any shortfalls they've identified over the years of experience. So that is kind of it in a nutshell. The Board of Supervisors introduced their ordinance back in December. They passed it on January 9th. A number of other cities took it up or are in the process of taking this up. The county wants it all done within the next month or so. So I won't go through all the key provisions of the ordinance because again, it's pretty vanilla. Nothing for us to be concerned about. Oops, I just have scooted past what I need you all to do. So what I need you to do is receive the staff report and ask any questions of staff. You'll conduct a public hearing, discuss the ordinance, by motion, determine whether to bring it back for second reading and adoption. And if you are in favor of this ordinance, you will direct my friend, the city clerk, to publish a summary of the ordinance at least 5 days before proposed adoption. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Do we have any questions of staff? Yes, Vice Mayor Beach.
Does Assistant City Manager Kiki Goldman support these changes?
That is an excellent question. The Assistant City Manager did review the staff report and she is on board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Excellent question. And to be fair, I'm sure that Vincent also had an
Deputy City Clerk,
review.
I think, is okay with it, but he's a little more difficult to pin down.
Yeah, they always are. So if we have no more questions, I'll open it up to public hearing. Does anyone have any public comments? Megan, any public comments on this? Nope.
No emails on this one.
All right. Vincent did not get to his typewriter. So we will, any discussion on the ordinance? Doesn't seem very controversial.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to bring it back for a second reading and adopt. I think
Perfect.
that's what we need to do.
We have a motion by the Vice Mayor Beach, and we have a second by Councilman Brownrigg. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brownrick,
Yes.
Councilmember Stevenson.
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz.
Ellie's good with it. Yes.
Vice Mayor Beach.
Yes.
Mayor Coulson.
Yes. All right, motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 10B, I'm going to turn this over to City Attorney Gina, who I think has a few comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, as you indicated earlier on in the agenda, staff is asking that we continue this item to the next council meeting. We need a little bit more work to do, but we plan to bring it forward to you at the next meeting.
Do we need to do that by motion, or may we do it by consent?
I think if
Consensus
of the council.
Consensus. Everyone's okay to move this? All right, we will move this on to the next agenda. Item number, so we're going to move on to, and is there public comment on that? Do we need to take public comment?
No.
Okay, no problem. We'll move on then. Item 11A, update on soft story buildings ad hoc committee report out. And I believe we have Director Gardner here.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Coulson and members of the council. We appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on the work of the Soft Story Buildings Ad Hoc Committee that have been working on this important issue. I want to also acknowledge with us this evening is Dina Gunning, Community Risk and Resilience Specialist with Central County Fire, who has been an excellent resource. And then also former Mayor Terry Nagel, who really has spearheaded this topic from the beginning, and we really appreciate her leadership on this. So next, please. Just very quickly, soft story building, here's a diagram of one. They tend to be top-heavy buildings with a big open floor. In Burlingame, usually that open ground floor are carports. In some instances, it may be a retail storefront, but generally it's top-heavy. Next, please. In an earthquake, you get the lateral motion, the building goes side to side, and then those structural members down on the ground floor fail. Next, please. The fixes are relatively straightforward. It's generally a combination of steel frames and then also some shear walls that are not shown here, but it's basically you're counteracting that lateral movement. Good news is building codes from 1978 onwards have built this in, so the newer buildings don't have the same risk, but any building prior to 1978 could potentially have this issue. Next, please. So why is this important? Life safety, obviously, nobody wants to be in a building or even worse, under the building when it collapses. But there's also a financial case to be made, particularly for the property owners. Only about 10% of California property owners have earthquake insurance. So should you be the unfortunate owner that owns this building when it collapses, that may be a total loss. Even if it's not a total loss, there's the cost of repairs. And then if the building is red tagged, then you're losing rent. So there is a financial case to be made. It's a good investment. There's also the displacement, which is an interest to community. Earthquakes, they're rare. We tend to not think about them, but when they happen, the damage is widespread. So you can have a fairly substantial displacement of your community. Here in Burlingame, that's really important. A lot of the soft story buildings are what we call naturally occurring affordable housing. So should those units be out of commission, that could really be damaging to our community overall. Next, please. So the general plan provided us guidance. And again, I want to thank former Mayor Nagel on this, in that these goals with her and also Justin Moresco was a structural engineer and resident here. They were really helping us with this during the general plan. We want to protect the buildings in Burlingame by reducing risks associated with geological and seismic hazards. Next, please. And then a lot of language here, but it's basically the policy is to encourage owners to take steps to retrofit their buildings, and in the case of our presentation tonight, form an ad hoc committee to evaluate the costs and benefits of potential actions and provide a recommendation to the city council. Next, please. Here's the big list. It's in the staff report too. We put together a really outstanding group of individuals with a wide range of perspectives and expertise, and everybody here knows something about the topic. So we've had 4 really good substantial meetings, and if you didn't have a chance, the meeting summaries are in the staff report, and they're also on a webpage that we have for this project. I do want to also acknowledge we've have 2 maybe honorary members that have joined us lately, Anna Mascola from the Thrive Alliance and Sarah Atkinson from SPUR, which is the San Francisco Bay Area Planning and Urban Research Association, have started joining this effort. They gave us a presentation in the most recent meeting and have really been championing this on the county level as well. Next, please. So the ad hoc committee's work plan was starting with review of what was a street, sidewalk, or windshield survey to determine the potential numbers or magnitude of buildings, not to actually create an inventory or list. Next was to look at review and ordinances from other cities. Don't reinvent the wheel. Lots of municipalities have come before this, so we can learn from them. Consider options and incentives and requirements, and then finally report findings to the city council. And I'd say we're not quite at the place where we're reporting findings. This is a check-in. There are some themes that have come up, but there's still work to be done as we'll go on. Next, please. Looking at that sidewalk assessment, we had Bureau Veritas, which also provides a lot of our structural engineering services here for the building division. They had a trained structural engineer just look at buildings from the street. So this is educated guess, but that's it. So this is an individual who knew what to look for, but without further analysis. So these numbers are considered really, the intent is to get order of magnitude. Are we talking thousands of buildings, or in this case, the survey identified 140 potential buildings and in the residential structures and 15 potential commercial structures. Single unit dwellings were not included. It's not to say they're not important, but that was not the subject of this evaluation. If we're to just, and this is again very much back of the envelope calculation, let's just assume each of these buildings has 10 units. We're talking about 1,400 units, and that's about 10% of the city's building stock or units. Next, please. I'll also add SPUR with Sarah Atkinson did a similar study using a different methodology and came up with very similar numbers. So I think we feel good that this is the relative ballpark, but I wouldn't say it's exactly 140 or what have you. Now, this also, speaking of SPUR and Thrive Alliance, this is a chart that they provided with us in the last meeting, and it nicely summarizes the different policy directions that jurisdictions have taken. No program is status quo, and that's applies to all of San Mateo County at the moment. Voluntary would be a voluntary ordinance with incentives. Monitoring or screening is the next stage where mandatory screening, where instead of taking our educated guess windshield survey, we actually have a methodical screening where property owners are required to do some sort of assessment or study of their building and then provide the results back to the city. And then we are able to actually put together an inventory. And that can be very useful and important for obtaining grant funding and as well as just knowledge is power. And last is mandatory retrofit. And that is where cities have, usually they'll have a schedule. They don't require everybody to retrofit all at once. And there's a couple of reasons. One is it's a big burden on the city to process all of those. If everybody were to go at once, it also stresses contractors. There's lots of qualified contractors available to do this work. But if everybody signed up on day one, then they would have a hard time as well. Next, please. And then what this shows, this is in the staff report, and this also comes from, this actually comes from a report that was produced by Stanford Public Policy for Thrive Alliance. So they were looking at the track record of different cities or different municipalities in what kinds of ordinances they adopted. You can see some of the early ones were voluntary with incentives, Fremont, Oakland, and San Francisco. Then there's a few that have mandatory screening, but don't necessarily have anything beyond that. But it's a start. Again, having that knowledge is important. What you will see is that all of those voluntary cities ultimately moved over to mandatory programs later on after discovering that the voluntary programs were largely ineffective. Next, please. Well, what are some of the financing and incentives? Because this is expensive to do these retrofits, and a lot of these property owners, they may be property rich but cash poor. So what are some options to help move things along? Certainly expedited permits, reduced permit fees, inspections, reviews can make the process go smoother. Reduced permit fees, zoning incentives, and what cities, probably the most useful zoning incentive is related to parking. For example, if you look at all of these open carports, if those were to be replaced with units rather than parking spaces, that already then provides you with that structural stability that you need to stabilize the building, and then you're also creating more housing units. You are losing parking spaces. So similarly, you could have a density bonus. You can have all kinds of different zoning relaxations to allow more development on site, should that help underwrite the project. Technical assistance in terms of either financial or professional expertise. Berkeley has a transfer tax rebate. There is property assessed clean energy financing, in theory, PACE. There's private loans, and that's something that can be done through banks. There are a lot of equity in these buildings, so a line of equity is certainly a way to finance these kinds of repairs. Interestingly, tax reductions for historic properties should the city enact a Mills Act program. Some of these mid-century buildings could also qualify for listing on a historic register should they want to. And then that, under the Mills Act, could provide some opportunities to do those types of repairs. And then FEMA grants. And that's a big topic. So I'll leave it there, but there's a lot to say just on that. Next, please. So the ad hoc committee has had 4 different meetings, and we've gone through all of this. This has been completely compressed from 4 hours to, what was this, 10 minutes or so. But I think what the committee members are really focused on is, in order for a program to go forward, very important to identify funding. That's the first thing any property owner is going to ask, and they will panic if they don't have a good answer in front of them. So we want to make sure we've got all our ducks in a row and are able to provide guidance on how they can implement these types of retrofits. Along those lines, establish this plan of action so it's very clear to a property owner what they need to do. We're not just sort of throwing a requirement on them and then having them go up to the building division and try to figure it all out. We want to be a whole plan outlined out so that they know exactly what to do, and we're there to help. And that can include a communication plan. There was a lot of discussion in the last committee meeting over how exactly to roll out any kind of program, how to have that kind of communications with property owners and with tenants, and talking to council, talking to forming a program, all of the different pieces to make sure everybody's following and on board. Next, please. I'm sorry, I should go. On the right, there was the project webpage. So should you want any more of these resources, burlingame.org/softstory. Next. So this is where I've learned a lot, but I am not an expert on this. There are people that know much more and are available to provide technical assistance. So we've identified one of these individuals. His name's David Bonowitz, who is a local recognized expert in this field. He has helped develop ordinances for numerous jurisdictions, most recently for Mill Valley and for Albany, and sees that those are good proxies for some of the buildings we have here in Burlingame. So we've asked him if he's available. He is. Busy calendar, but he's managed to find some time for us. So he's outlined a 6-stage kind of generic process. It's not to say that we need to do all 6, so that's partly what we want to get some feedback from the council on. Stage 1 is inventory, which we already did start. Should we want to, we could dive deeper into that inventory and try to get more information out of the buildings that are identified. Maybe, maybe not. Review of city plans and mitigation programs is important for setting up a program. Looking at the types of buildings that are specific in Burlingame. We have a lot of particularly mid-century apartment buildings, so there is a commonality of type, but there may be some others that we haven't thought about. And then looking at the cost sharing, including grant opportunities, we want to be able to identify that. And someone like him is very knowledgeable about what's going on in the ground as well as the legislature. Then going to legislation, which would include designing a program and then implementation. And that could be anywhere between $25,000 and $50,000, depending on if it's all of this, it's up around the 50,000. If the council feels like we already kind of know what we want to do and want to skip over to numbers 4, 5, and 6, then it's maybe a little less. But that's the range he's given us. And we will get a scope of work from him, assuming this is something the council is in support of, and we can give him a little more guidance on how much detail we want to go into. Next. So with that, I'm available for questions, as is Dina Gunning. And then we have some committee member comments that have come in through email as well as in person. So as the pleasure of the mayor to roll those out.
First of all, I'm going to turn over to the council for anyone who might have questions.
I do, Madam Mayor.
Okay, I'll take offline on our Zoom call, Councilman Ortiz.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Was a great presentation. Curious, did it come up at all, the idea of using impact fees to help fund these improvements in return for some sort of affordability covenant?
That has been discussed. So I think that could be a legitimate use of the housing impact fees, particularly given that the HOPE Committee has identified preservation of the naturally occurring affordable housing as a priority. So we'd need to figure out how much money would be on offer and then what conditions that would come with, whether it's protecting all of the units or some of the units. But that has been discussed and that could be a valuable incentive.
Great, thank you.
All right. Yes, Councilman Brownray.
So appreciate the work of the committee. And I'll save comments because I think the mayor wants us to focus on questions here at the front end. So I think the biggest question for me is at what point does, so I personally think the first 3 steps are pretty easy and the hard one is mandatory, right? And so for me, the question is, at what point does a mandatory retrofit cost so much that the building owner says, I'm done, I'm just going to sell? Because that is an even faster way to displace a lot of folks who are living in naturally occurring affordable housing. And so my question is, did the committee try, and I recognize 140 buildings, different situations and so forth, try to come up with an average cost per square foot, per building, per unit, so we have a sense of the scale? And I will say, because of some of our work in the housing ad hoc committee looking at a particular opportunity, I have a sense, but that's a bigger than average opportunity. So I guess I wonder, first of all, did the committee or an expert provide a guesstimate as to what, a retrofit would cost?
We do have some numbers, and this is based off of the numbers that came from the cities that have been doing the retrofits. They average anywhere from about $12,000 per unit to $16,000 thereabouts. I would say we should assume higher. These are old numbers. They may not be that old, but we all know construction costs. So let's say it's anywhere from 12 to 20,000. If it's a 10-unit building, we're talking $100,000 to $200,000. So most of these buildings, I don't think it would tank the value of the building, but there may be an owner that has a hard time coming up with that money, and they may or may not be wanting to do an equity line or what have you. And that is a concern that was raised in the Stanford study as well, is then does it then result in sales of buildings and rents going up and displacement? And that is a concern. So you want to be sensitive to that as you're putting together these ordinances.
So I'll hand over the microphone so others can ask questions, and I look forward to the conversation that'll ensue. I will say, I think PACE financing has a real appeal because it would stay with the building in the same way that solar panels do. To me, that makes sense as a vehicle to look at, but I look forward to hearing other comments. Thank you.
Fantastic. Vice Mayor Beach.
Yep. Thanks for the report and the transparency. I love that the committee work and all the minutes were there. This is just, you know, could really dive into it and see the thought process, and the committee did some really important work. To my question, regarding mandatory screening, do we have a sense of what that costs? Because that's kind of an interesting first step, right? To understand what the problem is. And it could have some public safety, I would think, to have a record of where soft storage units that don't just from the street look like they might have a problem, but to actually have a register of where the problems are should an earthquake hit might be valuable too.
Sure. And thank you. I'll acknowledge you sent that question earlier today, and so I've phoned a few friends to see if we could get a number. I don't have a number yet. So I don't want to guess, but I will commit to finding one. And if it's not me, then if we have Mr. Bonowitz, hopefully he'll be able to.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Councilman Stevenson.
No, Councilmember Ortiz asked my question.
Okay,
so.
fantastic. And I have comments, but I'll hold back. So we'll go ahead and open this up for any members of the public. And I believe, Megan, there were a few that came in, and I see there's some members of the public in the audience. So I'll turn it over to you if you want to.
Sure. I think we'll start with our former mayor.
Would you like? Yes, yes. I didn't know if you wanted it read or if you wanted to come up again, but please come on up. Thank you very much, former Mayor Nagel.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Terry Nagel, and I'm sitting here wondering how old most of you were when we had the '89 earthquake. And I'm thinking, I remember that very well. Those buildings in the marina were just pancaked. There were lives lost. It was really scary. And that's sort of the picture I have in my head when I think about this issue. So today there was a 3.4 earthquake near Watsonville, which is a reminder that, you know, we're long overdue for an earthquake. And I think that I represent tonight the Burlingame Neighborhood Network, which unanimously approves the idea of going forward with the study of this issue. We put safety as our primary concern, the safety of residents. And as you know, running local government, that is a primary concern of local government too. So this started back in 2019. It was postponed a bit by the pandemic. We had a few meetings, but I'm so thankful that Kevin Gardner included this in the general plan because it is something that all the cities should be doing. And I think the reality is that the cost of repairing a building is going to be, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars compared to tens of thousands of dollars for repairing, excuse me, many of these buildings. So if people could have a look at some of the comparison photos that have been taken of buildings that were reinforced with the soft stories that were fixed versus the ones that collapsed, I think they might get a better idea of not only, you know, the savings that they would have, but also for the safety of their residents. So BNN urges you to go forward with a plan. It doesn't happen overnight, we know that, but we do think it's important to start examining the problem, finding out what exactly is involved and exactly how many buildings are impacted, and then coming up with a gradual transition into making this a mandatory policy as some cities have done. And I think we can learn a lot from those cities because they've been through it. We also have some very fine people on the committee. The head of the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program is on there, which is a real coup, as well as Dina Gunning, who has been through this process in Oakland. And then Justin Moresco is a certified earthquake expert, and he's also on the committee. So I urge you to take some action for the safety of our residents, and hopefully we can show some other cities how to do it too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public here who would like to speak? Or I will turn it over to Megan for the readouts.
We have an email from Justin. He says, I'm glad that you are scheduled to discuss retrofits of soft story buildings at your meeting on Tuesday. I know from my professional experience as a specialist studying building performance in earthquakes that pre-1980 multi-unit apartment buildings with weak first stories are very likely to collapse during an earthquake, just as they did during the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area and the 1994 Northridge earthquake in Southern California. Besides the risk to lives, these buildings pose a serious threat to leaving hundreds of people in Burlingame needing emergency shelter during a major earthquake. I support staff's recommendation to hire a structural engineer to scope out the project. Importantly, Burlingame would not need to reinvent the wheel in developing this soft story retrofit program. Other cities in California have done this already, such as Fremont, San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, and Mill Valley. Our program, if implemented, could learn from the experiences of these cities. I urge you to demonstrate leadership and long-term thinking in support of a program that will lead Burlingame to becoming a safer and more resilient community. Thank you for your consideration. And we have one more email. It's from Sarah Atkinson. She says, I am the Earthquake Resilience Policy Manager at SPUR, a regional organization focused on urban planning policy, research, and education. I'm writing to express the importance of advancing the development of Burlingame's soft story seismic retrofit program. In the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, 8,600 housing units in San Francisco became temporarily uninhabitable due to damage, while 130 buildings with over 1,000 housing units were damaged or destroyed beyond repair. In Oakland, 1,300 housing units in multifamily buildings, majority soft story, were severely damaged. In the Northridge earthquake, which occurred 30 years ago tomorrow, some 200 soft story buildings collapsed, including one in which 16 people died. The Association of Bay Area Governments, ABAG, estimates that the collapse of soft story buildings will account for 2/3 of all units lost after our next major Hayward fault event. The Soft Story Ad Hoc Committee estimates that there are 140 soft story buildings in need of retrofitting in Burlingame. These soft story buildings likely house nearly 2,000 residents. If these buildings collapse or are severely damaged in the next major earthquake, these residents are likely to experience displacement from the city or region, or at worst, homelessness. Please think toward the future of your community and prioritize this important work. Thank you. And those are our emails.
All right. Colleagues, I'll open it up to comments. Cardo, do you want to start? Do you have anything?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I like what Mayor Nagel said, and I think it's great all the efforts that she has put into this, and so I like the gradual approach, but at the end of the day, leading to a mandatory program. So looking to start with lots of carrots and moving to sticks. Yeah, so that's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Sure. Please, Vice Mayor Beach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No, I heard a statistic one time at a briefing that we have like a 70% chance in the next 30 years of a 7.0 quake, USGS says. I mean, it's coming. It's just awful. And actually, the thought of, an earthquake, 200 units killing 16 people, if we have, so many more units, right? 1,400 units. And think in terms of how it affects people. 2,000 to 3,000 people live in those units. We've got it's so good we're tackling this. So I just applaud. I love that Burlingame's leading on this, and we're the first in the county to really have an ad hoc committee that has stakeholders from all different perspectives to try to figure this out, because we have to come up with a rational way to figure out how is this going to be paid for, and how can we do this in a way that makes sense. So, and it seems like there's a lot of grants out there, so I'm glad we can have an expert. Some of the folks in the East Bay, I've heard, can get as much as like 75% matching funds. I don't know if I have the numbers right, but there's money out there. And if there's creative financing and there's financial incentives, and we have some matching funds, maybe even from our affordable housing funds, there's got to be a way to cobble this together to move this forward. So I'm particularly interested in education and communication and visuals. I think we need to invest in that. Yes, we need a consultant, but we need to really communicate this in a really proactive way. I would be particularly interested in at least starting with mandatory screening, so we really know what the problem is and how much it could cost. And then, yes, are there incentives, but helping owners figure out what are creative ways that they can help finance this. The argument that the committee came up with, that it's really a financial, a good investment in the long term for an owner, but helping spell that out, that's part of communication. So I just really support the idea of getting a consultant and keeping this moving forward, keeping the committee together. I'd love to see some occupants of Soft Stories on the committee if it's ripe for that too. I think that may be one piece that's missing. But very, very excited that we're taking this seriously and we're leading on it. So those are some comments I have. Thank you.
Yes, Councilman Brownway.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I echo the comments of my colleagues. I appreciate the work. So to me, it's not a trivial financial equation to solve. I mean, if it's, round numbers, $200,000 times 140 units is $28 million. So it's not a small amount of money. Now, maybe it's a lot less than that. Those numbers, the range changes a lot. So, I definitely think getting a more granular look at cost will help us then develop the best financing program. I agree that this should be incremental, but with a view towards becoming mandatory. I like the idea of trading off potential public subsidy for affordable housing, but public subsidy is really precious. So we'd have to make sure we really felt we were getting something worthwhile. And I think that's subject to study and to developing formulas that might work. I mean, there's a place at which the owner won't do it, so trying to figure out that balance. But I agree very much. 140 units or 1,400 people, however we got up to that number. I mean, that's, like you say, that's 10% of our total housing stock. So it's a really significant threat to the people who live here, and we should be trying to do something about it. Like I say, I just want to be careful before we actually adopt a mandatory program that we are very conscious of what it's going to do to owners who are probably, many of whom are baby boomers, many of whom, don't make a lot of extra money in these buildings, notwithstanding the sort of common stereotype. And we just need to be mindful of what happens. So, but I appreciate the work very much, and I look forward to pushing it forward with the council and the committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Coulson. I totally agree with the comments from my other colleagues on the dais. I think my guidance would be, I think we need to have a lot of information and options about what this is at the end, so that we can actually move incrementally through that process and know where all those kind of touch points are. I like the idea of tying this into not just the affordable housing portion of our element and what options we have from that to kind of incent owners to possibly increase density and other factors. Certainly in certain parts of our community, there are a great deal of concentration of these soft story structures, and they disproportionately represent a fair number of the residents of Burlingame as well. So I don't think it's just the number of housing, it's also the density of the population in those areas. But I think that figuring out that end-to-end flow and then putting in the right incentives and moving incrementally through it is the right answer.
Thank you. Did you have something else?
I did. Thank you.
Please, of course.
For something that actually, Councilmember Browning, thank you for comments too, colleagues. you know, the part you brought up, Councilmember Brownrigg, about where's that sweet spot, that balance is so important because like you said, displacement could happen. Yes, if an earthquake happens and people don't have a place to live, but displacement could happen if the owner just tries to sell. And then let's be honest, the soft story stock, the older than 1978 disproportionately are naturally affordable housing. So it's sort of an equity issue that probably lower income people need to have a safe place to live, but they also stand to be displaced if the owner.
Right.
So it's this really difficult balance. The idea that I thought the soft story committee came up with that I just wanted to chime in too, is the idea of maybe creating incentives for additional units where there might be a parking that may not be needed. I, of course, would be thrilled for the committee to explore that too, because then you create additional structure underneath and housing units as well. And in places that may not need as much parking, that's a really creative idea to kind of solve for some of this. So anyway, thank you for entertaining me, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you. I love all of these. Given that, Burlingame is the second densest city on the peninsula with the second highest percentage of apartments, going to probably something close to 60%, and that we do have such an older stock from 1978, because we have always been a welcoming community for multifamily residential and diverse people and workforce housing. We, I think, have a very high level of responsibility to step forward with our capable staff and our consultants and take a position on this and put together policy that will make sense going into the future. I too share the concern of Councilman Brownrigg about the cost of this, and we all know that's what ends up driving people out of affordable units. So with that in mind, I have sort of a few thoughts on that. First of all, I'd like to look at something around zoning with maybe something like transferable development rights. So in other words, we could zone and allow density in certain areas where we know there are a lot of these buildings. I'm guessing most are going to be downtown and El Camino Real. So if there was a way to say like, all right, you might have some additional development rights here, whether it's, another 10% or something that you could build. So you would create value in the property, but then you would be able to possibly, if you don't, you could either redevelop and, at a higher density possibly, and then that might make financial sense. Or you could potentially sell off those development rights, to new developers and take that capital and that equity that we create for them. It's a little like what we did with the zoning, the sea level rise zoning on the Bayfront. By creating value in these properties, then the owners can either finance against them, the additional value, or they could sell, or they could renovate, given now they're going to be able to build something a little more dense. So I think exploring sort of these sort of interesting zoning contingencies that we could use might be a way to create value that we could self-finance it and not have to rely on just the market and an 8% loan. The affordable housing funds, it's an interesting conversation. They might be, something like that could be great to create like a match loan, where we'll make a loan, it's 10 years, you keep your units affordable for 10 years, we loan it to you at 2%, it comes back into the fund so we don't lose it, we recapture it, but we give a very, very attractive interest rate, and it matches. So every dollar you put in, we put in a dollar. And if we do something like that, I think what happened in San Francisco, having been living there in 1989 when the earthquake happened, is that, and I was living right on the border of the marina, is liquefaction. So I don't know that we have a lot of liquefaction, but what it would seem to me is prioritizing highly vulnerable assets first, and then whether it's because of where they are on landfill or where they are just the nature of the construction or something. So figuring out a way to prioritize certain projects and help those, owners move that along. And to that end, I think we should probably revisit looking at the Mills Act and looking at a preservation discussion for the entire city. I know we've brought it up on several occasions and there's never been any traction for it, but I will be bringing it up under 13 today. And then just finally, one more my comments are quite messy here. I think an amalgamation of all these kinds of ideas could create a really robust program that would offer a lot of carrots. And we might be in a different position because if people thought they would have 5 years to maybe take advantage of these, and then after 5 years, we were going to go to a mandatory, I think it could work really, really elegantly to solve the problem or move it forward. So those are my comments. I don't know that we need a motion today, but I think, Kevin, you have direction, Councilman Brownrigg?
No, I think you summed it up very well, Madam Mayor. I just had two additional thoughts. One, I mean, I would assume that the consultant we hire is, I can't quite remember the list of 6 items, but I mean, I think financial creativity should be a part of his or her mandate. So it's not just the structural engineering, but it's thinking about some of these things. I mean, one of the nice things about asking an owner to keep something affordable is you're not actually asking them to put money in. You're just asking them not to raise rent on a certain number of units for a certain number of years. And that's a much easier give for a lot of owners, I think. So I think there really could be something creative. And then I'm sorry, one last thought was we really ought to model it whenever we get around to having a program. We ought to model it in the same way that they do tax reductions for EV, EV sales. So act now and you get 7,500 back. Can't tell you whether that's going to exist next year, right? So it tends to pace the early adopters come in, and then you can pace the amount of subsidy because you can see how much use it gets, So, but I think it's really great, and I look forward to the consultants' feedback.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, so we have some direction on that. I want to thank former Mayor Nagel for coming to the meeting today and taking your evening, your precious time away from family to join us today. It's always great when former electeds step back into the ring and help us out with their great and extensive knowledge and background. Thank you very much. All right, we have moving on to item 11B, adoption of a resolution authorizing the amendment of the city manager's employment agreement to provide a salary increase of 4.5% and approving the city of Burlingame pay rates and ranges. Lisa, I'm going to save you a moment here of the staff report, having to report on your own thing.
I don't report, it's Maria.
Oh, okay. Maria's going to report. Well, I just, we're going to hear a little report here, but I just really want to thank Maria, Lisa, and colleagues for we do a really comprehensive review every year of the city manager and the city attorney, who are the direct reports to the council. With a facilitator, each of us spends hours providing feedback and coalescing it. So these raises are not just handed out arbitrarily. They are raises that are in conjunction with the excellent performance that I think we all see in our city manager. But with that, I'll turn it over to Marie, and then we will open it back up for public comment and council comment.
I think you did a better staff report than I did. So we have for your consideration a resolution to authorize an amendment to the city manager's employment agreement to provide a salary increase. As you know, City Manager Lisa Goldman began her service with the city of Burlingame on December 27, 2012. On December 6, 2023, the City Council met with Ms. Goldman in closed session to review her performance after her 11th year as city manager. Following the evaluation of her performance, the City Council discussed Ms. Goldman's compensation in closed session. And in recognition of Ms. Goldman's positive performance evaluation, the City Council discussed the proposal to increase the city manager's salary by 4.5%. The salary increase is in line with what the city department heads and unrepresented units also received. Excuse me. In order to increase her salary, Section 5 of the employment agreement must be amended to increase the monthly salary from $22,871.64 per month to $23,900.87 per month, effective January 15, 2024. So in order to move this forward, the City Council will need to authorize that new salary schedule go forward with this, as well as approve the resolution authorizing the amendment that the mayor can sign on behalf of the city. With that, I can take any questions that you.
All right, anyone have questions? All right, I'm going to open it up for members of the public who might want to comment on this agenda item. Ms. Nagel, Mayor Nagel, please step up to the podium.
Well, I can't resist because we hired Lisa and she was such a find. I mean, it was really, really tough to find good candidates and we were in high despair and in shock, and she's been great ever since. So thank you, Lisa, for doing a fabulous job.
That is a very nice legacy for the council at that point in time. Lisa, is there a sign on your desk with all their names?
Had quite a few now.
That's pretty cute. All right, so if we have no other members of the public who wish to comment on this item, we can take it for a roll call vote.
I think there has to be a motion to.
Oh, sorry, do we have a
I
motion?
will, which I will gladly make. Point
Oh, sorry.
That 4.5% is just a little bit, and then there's a whole iceberg.
That's right.
City manager.
Kind
I
of-
The iceberg.
happily make a motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Councilman Ortiz makes the second with a motion by Councilman Brownrigg. Thank you, Megan. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Stevenson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beach,
Yes.
Mayor Coulson.
Yes, motion carries unanimously. All right, last couple of items on the agenda here, and we will get everyone onto the road. We have number 12, Council Committee and Activities Reports. They are in the minutes and the agenda. Anyone can take a look. Does anyone have any questions about any of those items? All right, no comments from members of the public. Megan, I take it? All right, we'll move on to future agenda items. All right, at the risk of absolutely losing my hand on the very first meeting, I do think Kevin brought up a really important point, which is this conversation around the Mills Act and the historic preservation. I know the council has not been interested in potentially funding right now, individual property owners have to do their own work, and we've ended up on numerous occasions with people coming into the planning commission very, very upset after having purchased a property and then learned that it was historic. So one way to get around that, and many of these people have advocated around this, is to do more of a look into what it would cost and take to do a city-sponsored analysis and overlay, which could tie into these soft-sided story buildings, which I'm sure many of which might be mid-century modern. They could have elements of historic preservation. I just don't know if anyone else is interested in, and I'm not putting this on today. This is like a 1 to 2 year project, but we've never had traction on it.
I feel like I should always support a colleague's desire to investigate something, and so I will.
You don't have to, honestly. I'm actually just bringing it up in real.
Well, I will say that, I'm a veteran of being on the planning commission during this, and when that downtown survey was done, a whole lot of people wound up being told they had historic buildings that they didn't agree with, and it created a lot of friction too. So I remember at the time thinking letting people self-select might be a slightly better approach. But I'd be happy to have the dialogue.
Could we put it on an future agenda item, just to have the dialogue, Lisa? Without having to say whether we're going to do it or not?
Yeah, I mean, we can provide information on what it is and how it works and all.
More like a study session.
Yeah, like a little
Yeah.
study session on it.
I would support that. I haven't been around to understand the friction points as Councilmember Brownrigg raises, but I could imagine some of that. That doesn't mean we can't necessarily move forward. If the study session recommends, then it's thoughtful for the city to move forward on that. But at a minimum, I think it's worth studying.
Okay. All right. Well, looks like we have maybe 3 willing to at least put it on agenda. All right. And again, not for tomorrow, just somewhere down the road. All right. With that, we will move on to acknowledgements. Councilman Ortiz, I think you maybe had Michelle Privatera's mother pass away. Did you? I didn't know. Did you go to that service?
I did not.
Okay. Well, Michelle Privatera's mother passed away. There was a beautiful service for her on Sunday at St. Catherine's. I did not know her mother well, so I'd have to refer back. But to the Privatera family, I think we just want to extend our condolences. And then I had the very unfortunate position over the last 2 weeks that my mother-in-law also passed. And although she didn't live here, she spent a lot of time here taking care of my kids. And so Betty Zanger succumbed to Alzheimer's on January 3rd. And she was a lovely woman who I really appreciated in my life. So that's why I've been a little gone for the past 2 weeks, not that available. So I appreciate all of you stepping in and really pitching in and helping me out when I couldn't be available, staff and colleagues on the council. So thank you. Oh, no, thank you very much. So with that, I think those two families, we'll have just a moment of silence. All right, with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Oh, thank you.